A couple months back, we did a video on this channel for Master of Darkness for the Sega Master System and Game Gear. You can feel free to go back and check out that video now, but it basically talked about how there was a need and a want for a Castlevania-style game on a Sega system. Konami did eventually end up releasing Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis, or Sega Mega Drive depending on where you're from. Side note, as a kid from America, when somebody told me to go read the Book of Genesis, I was very disappointed. It was not at all what I thought it was going to be about. Anyway, Castlevania Bloodlines did end up coming out on the 16-bit Sega system, and eventually a 32X game did start development but was canceled before being finished and released. The team then moved on and created Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the Sony PlayStation. It was also later on ported by a different team for the Sega Saturn, but unfortunately only in Japan, and this would be the last time that a Sega console would have a Castlevania game. Fast forward to now, and homebrew developer Pigsy has been hard at work on making Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive. Before I move on any further and talk about the demo that was released this past Christmas for Symphony of the Night, I'd like for you to take some time to go to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames. Don't worry, I'm not going to be cracking the Castlevania whip at you. I'd just like for you to take the time when you get a chance to look over the different ways that you could help support us here at iDream of Retro Games, as well as at our parent channel at iDream of Indie Games. There are multiple tiers available, and take a look and see what fits inside your budget. As mentioned before, Castlevania Symphony of the Night was released on the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn and was a bit of a departure for the series. While Castlevania 2 did dabble a little bit with some non-linear gameplay, this was expanded greatly with Symphony of the Night, as well as adding some other RPG elements. What Pigsy has decided to do is to throw these elements away and to create the Genesis version to be more like a traditional Castlevania game. With the original game being a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood, you can see the influences from that earlier title coming through with this Genesis port. While the graphics, enemies, and locations will be straight from Symphony of the Night as you remember it, the way that you progress through the game is going to be a bit more traditional, moving from left to right and platforming to be able to get to the next room in the castle. Right now, the demo that is available has 4 different areas that you can explore, and that would be the entrance, Alchemy Laboratory, Marble Gallery, and the Outer Wall. But within those areas, there are multiple rooms to get through. You still get to play as Alucard with his sword, and you have a choice of 2 different ones with different hitboxes. As I mentioned before, the RPG elements are taken away, so there are no upgrades for these weapons, but you can still find the sub-weapons, and it uses the hearts to attack with them. This demo is not intended to be able to show off a game that's almost completed and going to be released soon, but instead just to show off what development progress has been made so far. Due to this nature of the demo, that means that there are going to be some quirks that you have to get through while playing, but it is cool to see how things are coming along. So yeah, there's going to be some placeholder backgrounds and missing death animations, as well as some questionable AI for enemies, but really what they've been able to accomplish taking a 32-bit game and getting it down to 16-bit is quite remarkable. The backgrounds that are completed, or at least close to it, as well as the enemy sprites and your character that you play as, all look great and have awesome animations there. On top of that, being able to translate the music from a CD to the Sega Genesis sound chip is also something that I really enjoyed listening to because I'm a huge fan of that sound style. Another quirk is the fact that you can't just walk from room to room, you have to press the start button to move on, but this also means that if ever you're having trouble with a part in the game or you just want to see what's next, you can press start at any time to get to the next area. There are also parts that look like the load screens from the original version, and this shows you the name of the area that you're about to go to. What's nice is there's also a button that you can press here that will cycle to the next world, so you could start on any area that you'd like. The developers were also smart and added both 3 and 6 button controller support. If you have a 3-button controller, A is backdash, B is attack, C is jump, and you use your sub-weapons by pressing up and B. If you have a 6-button controller though, you can also now use the Y button to use your sub-weapons. There are multiple versions of the demo available that have various levels of stability. One of them had issues with crashing, so they had to take away some enemies, and the more stable version is the one that I used, but you can feel free to try a different one. There's also one available with a 320 resolution mode. Internally, Pigsy has been able to make it so that you can switch resolutions within the same ROM, and that version will become available later later on as well. Besides adding more levels, enemies, and tweaking of AI, there are other goals and ambitions for this version to go forward, such as being able to add content from the Japanese-only Saturn version, including getting to play as Maria. This 16-bit version of Castlevania Symphony of the Night is something I'm definitely going to keep my eye on, and you should too over at Pigsy's YouTube channel. Not only is he giving you updates on what he's doing with this game, but he's also working on porting the Game Gear Shinobi game to the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. Finally, on top of all that, he also has many tutorials on how you too can also make games for the Sega Genesis. This is great for wannabe developers, as well as people who just like to see how the sausage is made. Anybody else here checking out the demo? If you have, feel free to let us know in the comments below. And again, I remind you to check us out over at patreon.com/idreamofindiegames.